In the early months of 1943, North Africa was a cauldron of conflict. Allied forces were locked in brutal combat with the Axis, but far from the front lines, a different kind of battle was unfolding in the opulent halls of Casablanca. Here, the leaders of the Allied nations faced a pivotal question. Where next? The Americans, eager to strike directly at the heart of Nazi Germany, pushed for a cross-channel invasion of France. The British, however, saw an opportunity elsewhere, a chance to dismantle the Axis through what they called Europe's soft underbelly. After days of tense negotiation, the Americans reluctantly conceded Sicily would be the first step. This island was more than a speck in the Mediterranean. It was a fortress of airfields, ports, and strategic value. Capturing it would not only provide a launch pad into Italy, but also relieve pressure on the Soviet forces grinding against Germany in the east. For the first time, the Allies would bring the war to Axis soil. Plans for Operation Husky were drawn with urgency. The goal was Messina, the gateway to the Italian mainland. But its formidable defences meant the Allies would need to strike elsewhere first. Months of preparation followed, while surrender in North Africa in May finally cleared the way. British and Commonwealth troops under General Bernard Montgomery would storm Syracuse, while General George S. Patton's Americans struck at Gela. High above, airborne divisions would seize critical bridges and crossroads, opening the path inland. Deception became an art form. In one of the most audacious roses of the war, Operation Mincemeat saw a corpse dressed as a Royal Marine officer and carrying false documents floated to the Spanish coast. German intelligence swallowed the bait, diverting reinforcements to Greece and Sardinia, leaving Sicily vulnerable. As July 9th approached, the Mediterranean churned with a violent storm. Allied paratroopers, inexperienced and untested, braved the skies, only to be scattered by fierce winds. Some crash-landed into olive groves or brick walls, others were wounded, captured or lost entirely. Yet even in chaos, the scattered forces wreaked havoc behind Axis lines, seizing bridges, disrupting communications and creating confusion. At dawn on July 10th, the invasion fleet struck the beaches. British troops met little resistance, capturing Syracuse swiftly and pushing toward Augusta. The Americans at Gela faced a harsher reception. Strafed by Axis aircraft and fired upon by nervous anti-aircraft gunners, they endured one of the war's most notorious friendly fire incidents. Yet despite the chaos, they held. Axis counterattacks faltered, coordination between Italian and German units broke down, and the beachheads solidified. The stage was set, Sicily was under assault, and the first gamble in the Allies' southern European strategy had begun. Success was not assured, but the die had been cast, and the war was about to reach the Italian doorstep. As the morning sun broke over Sicily, the invasion's first triumphs quickly gave way to a grinding, chaotic struggle. The paratroopers, scattered across the rugged terrain, faced confusion and peril. Many had landed miles from their intended drop zones, tangled in trees or wedged against rocky hillsides. Injuries were rampant, and units struggled to regroup. Yet even in disarray, these airborne soldiers struck at critical points, capturing bridges and crossroads that would shape the battle to come. Their improvisation slowed the Axis and bought precious time for the beachheads to expand. On the beaches, the Allies faced a contrast of fortune. The British advanced smoothly along the east coast, taking Syracuse and pressing toward Augusta. Their Italian defenders, demoralized and poorly equipped, offered little resistance. Gela, however, became a cauldron of fire. Axis aircraft strafed landing ships, while anti-aircraft fire from nervous Italian gunners turned the skies into a lethal gauntlet. Reinforcements sent to support the Americans arrived under heavy fire, resulting in one of the deadliest friendly fire incidents of the war. Despite these horrors, the beachhead held. The Axis attempted to push the Americans back into the sea, but poor coordination and fragmented command left the attackers exposed. Meanwhile, a clash of titans unfolded behind the lines. Montgomery and Patton, two commanders of towering ambition, approached the battle with starkly different philosophies. Montgomery advanced with deliberate precision, methodically building strength and minimizing casualties. Patton, ever impatient, thundered forward with speed and audacity, exploiting weaknesses wherever he saw them. The tension between them simmered, threatening to fracture the Allied effort. While Montgomery's Eighth Army painstakingly pushed toward Catania, Patton's Seventh raced along the coast, rolling up Italian defences and seizing over 50,000 prisoners in under a week, at minimal cost. The Axis forces, though battered, were not broken. German and Italian divisions attempted to reorganize and hold key positions, but morale was collapsing. The Italians, weary from losses in North Africa and crushed under relentless Allied air attacks, faltered under pressure. Their commanders, undermined by poor coordination with the Germans, struggled to mount a coherent defence. Meanwhile, German officers assumed real authority, taking orders directly from Field Marshal Albert Kesselring in Italy, leaving Italian units isolated and ineffective. Sicily's landscape itself became a battlefield. Open plains, mountain passes and fortified towns funneled the Allies into deadly encounters where superior numbers could be blunted by well-positioned defenders. Every advance was contested, every road and bridge mined or demolished. The relentless Sicilian sun and the threat of disease, malaria and heat exhaustion added a cruel layer to the struggle, incapacitating thousands of Allied soldiers. By mid-July, the battle was evolving into a war of attrition. Montgomery's methodical approach clashed with Patton's swift manoeuvres, yet both were advancing inexorably. Key towns fell, prisoners multiplied, and the Axis began to realize that their hold on the island was slipping. But Sicily had yet to reveal its deadliest challenge. The heart of the island, the high ground and entrenched towns awaited the Allies, promising weeks of brutal combat that would test soldiers, commanders and the limits of human endurance. In Sicily, victory was no longer a question of landing. It was about surviving the inferno and mastering a landscape as unforgiving as the enemy itself. By late July 1943, the tide in Sicily had shifted decisively, and the cracks in the Axis facade were growing impossible to ignore. On the Italian home front, despair had been quietly building. Years of military setbacks, relentless Allied bombings, and the grinding attrition of war had sapped both morale and faith in leadership. Now the campaign in Sicily provided the final straw. On July 24th, the Grand Council of Fascism convened in Rome. In a dramatic historic vote, Benito Mussolini was stripped of power, a dramatic upheaval that stunned the world. For the Allies, this was a seismic victory before a single bullet had been fired on the mainland. Italian defection was no longer a hypothetical, it was a reality. For Hitler, it was a nightmare. Germany now faced the prospect of occupying its former ally to prevent a total collapse in southern Europe. Back on the battlefield, command of the Axis forces fell squarely into the hands of Field Marshal Albert Kesselring. A seasoned strategist, he immediately reorganized German and remaining Italian troops for a fighting withdrawal. His goal, the Etna Line, a natural defensive barrier that ran across Sicily's mountainous interior, where every hill, town and narrow pass could be turned into a fortress. Trina Centuripe and Adrano became crucibles of resistance, where Allied forces would face some of the bloodiest battles of the campaign. Sicily's terrain became a weapon in Kesselring's hands. The Allies, despite numerical superiority, were funneled along a handful of roads and passes. Every advance met prepared defences, artillery raked the plains, armoured units held choke points, and roads and bridges were destroyed to slow the relentless Allied push. The island's blistering summer heat, soaring to 40 degrees Celsius, and outbreaks of malaria and fevers took a brutal toll, incapacitating thousands of soldiers, yet the Allies pressed on. Patton and Montgomery, though still at odds, now raced toward Messina, the gateway to the Italian mainland. Patton's forces, energized by speed and audacity, attempted bold amphibious flanking operations, only to find Kesselring's withdrawal masterfully executed. Bridges blown, mountain passes blocked, and the terrain itself funneling the attackers allowed the Axis to escape largely intact. The Strait of Messina presented one final obstacle. German forces, protected by over 230 anti-aircraft guns, moved mostly by daylight, while Allied night bombing could barely disrupt their retreat. Narrow waters, strong currents and enemy coastal artillery made a decisive naval interception impossible. In the end, some 120,000 Axis soldiers successfully evacuated to Italy, preserving a force that would fight bitterly on the mainland. After 38 days of relentless combat, Patton arrived in Messina just hours before Montgomery, marking the end of the Sicilian campaign. Strategically, the Allies had achieved every objective. The island was secure, air and sea routes were open, Mussolini had been toppled, and the Italian mainland was within reach. Hitler, forced to reconsider his southern strategy, had to divert attention and resources to secure Italy. But Sicily had been a harsh teacher. Friendly fire incidents, logistical chaos, and inter-Allied rivalries had highlighted glaring operational weaknesses. Troops had landed in the wrong places, units were scattered, and poor coordination risked disaster. Casualties, though lower than feared, around 6,000 Allied dead and 3 times that wounded, were sobering. Axis losses were severe, yet thousands had escaped, and the Allies would soon face them again on even more formidable ground. The fall of Sicily marked a turning point, not just geographically but psychologically. The collapse of Mussolini's regime, combined with the hard-won lessons of amphibious warfare, set the stage for the next chapter, the invasion of mainland Italy, where the campaign's true cost and brutality would be revealed. With the last Axis troops slipping across the Strait of Messina, the battle for Sicily drew to a close. For the Allies, it was a victory of monumental significance. The island was secure, Mediterranean sea lanes were open, and the Italian mainland lay just across the narrow strait. Mussolini had been toppled, throwing Italy into political chaos. Even the Eastern Front felt the ripple effects as Hitler suspended his offensive at Kursk, easing pressure on Soviet forces. Yet beneath the triumph lay hard-earned lessons. The largest amphibious operation of the war, over 180,000 men, 4,000 aircraft and 3,000 ships, had revealed vulnerabilities that could not be ignored. Troops had landed off target, airborne forces were scattered, and beach exits had become congested death traps in some sectors. Friendly fire incidents highlighted the dangers of poor coordination, while rivalries between commanders slowed momentum. The Allies had achieved victory against weak coastal defences, but Normandy would be a very different fight, demanding flawless planning and precise execution. Recognition markings on aircraft, coordinated flight paths and careful sequencing of airborne troops would become critical lessons learned from the Sicilian campaign. Casualties were heavy, though not as catastrophic as expected. Around 6,000 Allied soldiers were killed and nearly 18,000 wounded or missing, while the Axis lost roughly 9,000 killed, 45,000 wounded, and 125,000 captured, mostly Italians. Yet the surviving German forces had retreated in good order, preserving a fighting capability that would challenge the Allies again on the Italian mainland. The campaign also underscored the human cost of modern warfare. Malaria, heat exhaustion and fatigue had incapacitated thousands of soldiers. The Sicilian terrain, with its mountains, narrow passes and fortified towns, had turned every advance into a test of endurance and willpower. Soldiers learned that victory often came not only through firepower but through strategy, adaptability and sheer resilience. Strategically, Sicily was more than a foothold, it was a proving ground. It demonstrated the effectiveness of combined operations, the importance of deception, such as Operation Mincemeat, and the necessity of coordination among multinational forces. The lessons of Sicily would shape every Allied campaign that followed. Careful planning, flexible leadership, and meticulous attention to detail became non-negotiable. As the Allies looked across the strait at Italy, the next chapter loomed large. The Italian campaign would be longer, bloodier, and far more complex. Yet the seizure of Sicily had set the stage. It was a springboard into mainland Europe, a psychological blow to Axis morale, and a harbinger of the strategic victories yet to come. The war in southern Europe had only just begun, but the Allies had learned that with courage, ingenuity and relentless determination, even the most daunting challenges could be overcome.